the 10 most common retirement questions. Well, here, as we continue our look at those questions, we'll be tackling number 4 on the list, which is how much can I spend each month once retired? And here to talk with us about that is Dana Anspach from Sensible Money. Dana, welcome.
Hi, Bob. Great to be here.
Great to have you here. This is a question that you get asked frequently.
Yes, and as you were making the introduction, I thought, how did this get down to number 4? I wonder if this is actually the number 1 question is, tell me how much can I spend?
Well, how do you go about answering that?
Well, as you know, we go about creating pretty thorough, I shouldn't even say pretty, thorough financial models. And those financial models include outside sources of income, Social Security, pensions, annuities, real estate, continued part-time work in retirement, potential staggered retirement dates between couples, and it lays all of that out in a timeline format and calculates what would need to come out of someone's financial capital, their savings and investments, and how long would the money last. And so then we can play around with the level of spending and say, all right, well, could we spend more, or could this person spend more and not still run the risk of running out of money? So where is that fine line between holding enough back that you have plenty for later in life, including potential long-term care expenses, and making sure that you enjoy life during your early retirement years, what are called the go-go years, making sure that you have enough extra for travel or visiting grandkids or a remodel or some things that you can do at that stage in life. So it's a balancing act. It's not an easy question to answer. Of course, there's simple rules of thumb that will say you can withdraw 4% of your savings and investments and add that on to Social Security. But as we discussed in question number 3 of our 10 most common retirement questions, by delaying Social Security, sometimes you can make your money last longer. And so it's not so simple as just adding up Social Security and 4% of your savings and investments. By doing it in a more analytical way, sometimes you realize you can spend more than maybe you thought you could.
Right. So when I look at the expenditures that come from, say, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it shows that a housing expenditure sometimes is around 33% of a retiree's budget. And in many cases, as you probably know, right, is many retirees are retiring with mortgages or home equity lines of credit. How important is that they get a handle on their housing expense in retirement?
I've seen research, as I know you have, out of is it the Boston Center for Retirement Studies? May not have gotten the name quite right, but they've done a lot of research that shows that you're better off paying off the mortgage by retirement. Now, my only caveat to much of this research and the statistics that you quoted is you really need to break it down by demographic sector. So certain high net worth households can certainly maintain a mortgage. And if you were lucky enough to lock in a mortgage rate back at 2.75 or 3.25%, there might not be any reason to pay that off now. But if you are a household with more limited resources and you can work to pay down that mortgage by the time you retire, yes, it lowers that overall housing costs and certainly puts you in a more secure position. You still have to be able to maintain your property taxes, of course, and so you have to know that you have enough cash flow coming in to do that. So I think it's important to pull that research apart and think about the demographic sector that you're in and then apply a rule based on that. It's a little more customized way of looking at it.
Right. So the other big expense in retirement is healthcare. It again, according to the BLS, it starts out maybe at 5% of expenditures and rises to 15% over the course of someone's retirement. How do you plan for healthcare expenses and then pay for them?
Yeah, so we've actually seen healthcare expenses take up an even larger portion of retirees' budgets, as much as the 30% that you mentioned for housing. And so again, it depends on the demographic sector. But the main way that we account for it is, first of all, to put it in as an expense. So an example of the things people forget. Oftentimes, if you have a corporate employer, they may be paying for up to 90%, and in a few cases, 100% of your healthcare costs. You don't realize that if you retire, particularly before age 65, that you will have to pick up the tab for the majority of that cost. And so we will budget as much as $1,000 per month per person for that age 60 to 65 for them buying a plan. Think of it as off the shelf. They're either carrying their Cobra plan for a bit or picking up a healthcare plan off the ACA, the Affordable Care Act plans. So that's a chunk of money. $1,000 a month is a lot. Even if you are working in 265, Medicare, which we think of as free, and often people have heard, oh, I get free healthcare. Well, not quite. Medicare just covers a portion of your healthcare. Medicare Part A, the free part, is hospital insurance, but there's also Part B that you pay a premium for. And that premium is deducted from your Social Security benefit if you're already claiming. So sometimes people will project out their Social Security and say, oh, I'm going to get this much, but they forget that Part B premiums will be deducted out of that. And if you're delaying Social Security, as we think many households should, then you're paying a quarterly invoice for your Part B premiums. In addition, you're going to want, in most cases, a supplement policy. And so there's going to be a monthly premium for that. So the first is building those costs in, not thinking, oh my gosh, healthcare is free, I'm retired. So, it's building those costs into your budget so that you can account for them. But the second thing to think about is if we were to look at tax returns and the amount of deductions that we might take in the medical category, oftentimes we're just continuing the spending that we already incur. It's not necessarily this giant incremental increase over what we've already been paying. We're already paying out of pocket or pharmaceutical or alternative care costs or dental costs. And so we don't want to scare people with, oh my gosh, healthcare is going to cost so much. It's just like anything else. You have to plan for it as you go forward.
Right. And then when I think about spending in retirement, do you think about it in terms of total spending, or do you break it apart in terms of essential versus discretionary?
Both. Again, for us, it depends on the household demographic. We find for people spending in that 50 to 75,000 a year range in retirement, most of their spending is essential. There's some things they could cut back on, but oftentimes the majority of their budget is essential. Versus if I have a household that's spending, our largest household spends about $500,000 a year in retirement, or had us budget for about 7,500 to 8,000 a week of spending. Well, they have room for things to adjust. So there is both essential spending for them and discretionary spending on travel and entertaining and things that, if you're a more limited resource household, you're not going to have as much of that in your budget. So yes, I think it's important to separate essential versus discretionary, but more important for some demographics than the other. But what I think is even more important, we separate things into categories based on what rate of inflation we're going to apply to it. So if you have a mortgage, your mortgage and interest portion of your payment, or your principal and interest portion, is going to stay flat. So the good news is that part of your budget is locked in. It's insulated from inflation. But the property taxes and the homeowner's insurance, that portion of your budget is likely to experience an increase. So we will separate out those expenses as we're doing a forward-looking projection. We also apply a higher inflation rate to healthcare related expenses versus standard living expenses. And we can adjust inflation according to the period of time someone's in. So if they're in their go-go years, we'll often build in a little more spending. We naturally tend to slow down in what are called our slow go years in our mid 70s. And so spending often decreases at that phase. And so you can build that in versus just applying a blanket inflation rate across the entire amount.
Yeah. So in our first question, we tackled the question of, can I afford to retire? I think this ties in a little bit too, is when you think about how much you can spend each month, it's also how much can you spend over which period of time to make sure you don't run out of money talk more about the planning horizon and how important that is in this question.
Having a long planning horizon is important. We had lunch with one of our 84-year-old clients yesterday. And so she was talking about, she likes to plan in 2-year increments. And so one of our planners here has an aunt who's 107 years old. And so we were saying, we understand you want to plan in 2-year increments. However, you are, still 100% there and healthy and active and involved in your community and doing all of these things. And so there's this opportunity that you could be here a lot longer than a few years. So thinking in terms of longer time horizons is important, even if you feel like that time horizon is shorter. Our job is always that balancing act of, yes, we want you to enjoy today and be able to gift, but we also need to hold back enough that if you are one of those people here with us at 105 or 110, that you're still okay. And as we said, it's not an easy question to answer.
No, it's not. Even Nobel Prize winners like Bill Sharp have a tough time answering the question.
Yes.
So we covered a lot of ground. Anything we missed?
The other thing that came to my mind are expenses that sometimes people forget to include, and that might be major home repairs, your new flooring that you might need, or if you live in an older house, at some point, maybe the plumbing or the electrical or the roof will have to be redone. So sometimes we see that people forget to build those costs in. And one of the things that I think is most important, whatever that spending amount, I feel like people are more likely to stay within their range if they set it up as a monthly retirement paycheck.
Mm.
So we aggregate cash flow from various sources. And if it's coming from an IRA, we withhold taxes on it and it gets direct deposited for clients either on a monthly basis, or sometimes they want it to be, for example, on the 1st and the 15th, twice a month to replicate their paycheck. I sometimes see people take out a lump sum and park it in their checking account and then allocate it out. And I just don't think it works as well. It can cause you to overspend if you're that type, or it can cause you to say, oh, I'm going to scrimp back because I just don't, I want to take as little out as possible. And maybe you have room to take more out. So I think this concept of setting it up as a retirement paycheck works really well for people, helps you stick with the budget, helps you manage your cash flow, helps you know exactly how much you're spending. If suddenly you're coming up short and feeling like you need to take more out, that should be your warning sign that, I'm overspending my budget here. I'm going to need to make some changes.
All right. So next time we're going to tackle the 5th most common retirement question, which is what are my sources of income and what financial assets should I draw on first during retirement?
Absolutely.